And call this meeting to order. It's 11:02. And everybody will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. First flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a brief moment of silence. Okay. Next, we will have roll call.
Chairman Heyman.
Present.
Vice Chair Rotora. Director Itmeyer.
Present.
Director Peters.
Present.
Director Vallejo.
Present.
Okay, moving on to item number 2, AB 361 findings. This will be with Keith Lemieux.
Yes, this is a continuation of the findings that you made in the resolution about the current emergency that allows us to have meetings electronically. Of course, at this point, it's sort of belt and suspenders, given that we don't plan to change the meetings from the way that we're currently doing them now. However, if it turns out that a quorum of directors are unable to be here, then they would be appearing electronically. So this would help allow that to happen. It also is useful for purposes of the committee meetings, which may be done online, particularly the TAC committee. And so, again, just a continuation of what we've been doing.
Thank you, sir. Next, we will have item number 3, public comment.
Excuse me. How long do we expect that to last? That was a state thing, right? That allowed us to change time?
We're allowed to continue to have the meetings electronically, I think, until at least through the end of next year. As far as how long you plan to have continue to make these findings, I guess, the virus gets a vote on that one. But for clarity, I do need you guys to make a motion in a second and actually re-adopt the findings.
I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Okay.
Chairman Heyman.
Aye.
Vice Chair Rotora.
Aye.
Director Itmeyer.
Aye.
Director Peters.
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to item number 3, public comment. This time is reserved for the public to address the board about matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. We'll begin with public comment from the audience on the floor.
Nick Panzer, Ridgecrest, California. At the last GSA meeting, in regard to DW's offer to facilitate processing of our GSP, Director Vallejo replied that it was unwise to engage in facilitation while litigation was going on and adjudication proceedings were in process. Curiously, those are the very reasons that DWR gives for engaging in facilitation. And I think it's because they know something that we may not know. And I think that has to do with SGMA itself and one of the leading provisions in there, Section 10.720(1)(b). And it's that section that makes water rights take back seat to undesirable results when it comes to approaching SGMA. It's water rights that got us in this problem in the first place. And it's SGMA that leads the way out. And the way it does that is through how they approach and define, or have us define, undesirable results. I believe we should reconsider your rejection of their offer to facilitate. I believe that they can lead us out of our legal morass. and I think they should be given the opportunity to do so. Second and last point, real quick, I am still very much looking forward to seeing the audit of the year 2020. It seems awful late in coming out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Any other public comment from the floor?
Judy Decker. As some of you know, I have been involved in public meetings for over 30 years, attending city meetings, County Board of Supervisor meetings, Water District meetings, mostly in this meeting, which I have, I believe, attended every one that you have had. And I have a question for you. Every month, the Water Resources Manager brings before you a PowerPoint presentation of projects. You have had a variety of projects. Today's PowerPoint has on it, for instance, the wastewater percolation study. There is never anything in your board package regarding projects. There is often little posted, and April can't post it if she doesn't have it, on your websites, and yet you continue to spend local dollars and taxpayer dollars with Proposition 1 and Proposition 68 on these projects. You never discuss them. You never ask for their results and the ramifications of them. This isn't what happens at the Water District meeting. They discuss things extensively, and they involve the public. And I want to know why you don't. And I want to know how you make your decisions when you don't know what is involved.
Thank you, Judy. Any other public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we will move to the phones. Do we have any public comment on the phone lines? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to item number 4, the consent agenda. Consists of A, approved minutes of the board meeting November 10th, 2021. Item 4B, approved 2022 regular board meeting schedule. Item 4C, approved the expenditures. C1, $77,753.84 to Stetson Engineers. C2, $28,558.75 to Regional Government Services from the replenishment extraction fee. Item C3, $15,281.25 to Capital Core Group out of replenishment fee. Does any member of the public wish to have an item removed? Any member of the board wish to have an item removed?
I would like to remove 4C1.
We'll go ahead and move forward to approve the remaining agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Chairman Hayman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Ratora,
Aye.
Director Itnire,
Aye.
Director Peters,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, we'll move back to item number 4CI and Director Ratora.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Looking at the board packet, I was looking through their invoices and I see nothing on the annual report. I was curious, I'm assuming that it's embedded somewhere in one of these costs. And I was wondering if anybody knew where that was embedded.
If I might, Chairman Heyman?
Yes, go ahead.
I haven't looked at it, Director Vittori, I haven't looked at it. I don't have it in front of me to look at right now. But keeping in mind these invoices are a month in arrears. So while we collect during the year, and that is embedded in the invoice, the collection of the data for the annual report, actual work on the annual report is a separate job number, and we are working on it now. We've been working on it for this. So I expect you will see an annual report itemized on the next invoice.
Okay.
Going forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One other item, invoice, at least our invoice number 62, 2021 recycled water for replenishment fee. For $22,000, I should have started with the, $77,000 is a lot, and I think that is more than what we normally are invoiced on any given month from Stetson, but it's a lot of money, and so we need to know where it's coming from. But in particular, the $22,000 that is recycled water for replenishment fee, I was curious about.
Could you elaborate on as to what the curiosity is?
Yeah. It's $22,000, and what is it paying for?
Just in response, there generally is detail provided in the invoice on who worked on the particular item and what work was done. But this is working on the recycled water project, along with the technical team in the water district. We've released section 1, and now we've released section 2. We've gotten comments on section 1. We've gotten some comments on section 2. So we're working on working on the actual recycled water project.
Okay, so it's actually just recycled water work being charged to the replenishment fee.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll move we accept it.
Second.
Chairman Heyman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rotora,
Aye.
Director Itnire,
Aye.
Director Peters,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to item number 5, Water Resources Manager Report. This will be with Steve Johnson.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Heyman and the board. Good morning, everyone, and the audience and that is present and online. It's mostly an update. I am happy to report that as a concept a couple of meetings ago, one of our guys here, Joseph Montoya, who will present on the first couple of PowerPoints, but he's been very, very busy. Joseph is actually doing a lot of work on the recycled water project. Just a thought, a couple of months ago, I just thought it would be good to put together a summary of the accounting, requests for funds, funds received, funds retained, balances on both of the grant funds, Prop 1 and Prop 68. And you'll see it in the package today. Joseph did a wonderful job on this, working with April and the GA staff. So this was exactly what I was looking for. So Joseph will present that. But we will present updates on Prop 1 and Prop 68. I will do, and then Joseph will provide an update on the recycled water project, which Director Vittori had some questions on just a few minutes ago. He'll provide an update on where we're at there and where we're going. So you'll have that. I have a very brief report on some of the projects. I will mention, because we did get comments from audience, Judy Decker on the projects, and I'll just mention right now, so I won't mention it later, but I'll just mention projects that we're working on right now, like the recycled water project. We do provide regular reports on, and we do release the documents for technical issues, for technical committee review. We've been through section 1. We're going through section 2 right now. I believe they're also posted. So the work we're doing on the recycled water project should be out there for you to read. If you're not able to get it, let me or April know. We'll make sure that you can have that. The other projects that we're reporting on, for example, the surface percolation replenishment report, that report was released to the TAC. We've already received some very good comments. We're regrouping based upon the comments received, which were very good. But that is out there, and certainly if you'd like to see that phase 1 report, it's available. It should be online, but it's going through the TAC. Shallow well mitigation, temporary water use. Those have been around the block several times from a detailed perspective to a backing up to a more simple policy. Both of those have been discussed pretty extensively at the board level with the staff, and right now they are at the PAC and available for the PAC to review and comment on. So those are the projects, the primary projects we're working on, and then the annual report, which we have a report today. We're just getting started on that, and that will be prepared and out for review too. So I think we're trying very hard to make sure the work that we are doing, when there is a work product, even in draft, that it's out there and available. So that's very general. I'd like to, if I can, before I give it over to Joseph, I'll let you know that Heather Steele, who is working with G. Moran on the annual report, she thinks she was exposed to COVID just recently, and her son's not feeling well. So she was going to give the report today. She just texted me earlier and asked me if I would do it, so I'll walk through it today. It's a short report. It's basically a rework of the schedule in response to some comments by Director Ventura. But now I'd like to, if I could, turn it over to Joseph. If you would, Joseph, to walk through the first 3 or 4, and then when you're done, we'll go right to the recycled water slide. Thank you, Joseph.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Good morning, members of the board and the public. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you clear, Jeff.
Okay, great. So as Steve said, I'll be presenting on items 5A and item 5BI for the Water Resources Manager report. Starting with 5AI, the Proposition 1 status update. Unfortunately, I don't have an update on the first 2 invoices, 10A and 11A. These are still outstanding, and they're in DWR's hands as far as their review and authorization to receive payment for these invoices. If you'll recall, invoice number 10A, the total requested amount after retention was about $77,720. Invoice 11A, total requested after retention was $69,955. Again, no update on these. They're still in DWR's review, and we're hoping to receive payment for those invoices upcoming shortly. We did submit invoice number 12A on November 30th. That requested amount for invoice 12A was $1,843. But that invoice did include some of the removed costs that were taken out of invoices 8A and 9A, which I'll be discussing on the next slide when I get to the grant payment summary table. But this invoice did include those removed costs, which totaled about $130,000. If you'll recall, we had to remove those items from those invoices because of requirements that we complete a CEQA concurrence as part of the terms of our grant funding agreement. So we had removed those costs until that concurrence was complete. We completed the CEQA concurrence several months ago, so we submitted this invoice 12A with those removed costs. So we're hoping that in total, invoice 12A will be receiving the $130,850 plus the $1,843. So moving on to the next slide, as Steve mentioned, we have the grant payment summary. Now this is just a table showing the Proposition 1 side of our funding agreement with DWR. We've submitted up to, I think, 12 invoices as part of this grant payment process, going back all the way to July 2017 through September of this year. So you'll see on this table we've got a column A, which is the total amount that we've requested. before retention, and just to clarify what that means, part of our terms of our grant agreement requires that the state withhold 10% of the amounts that we request for reimbursement as a retention, and that retention will be given to the Groundwater Authority once the grant work is fully completed and we move into grant closeout, which will include submitting and approving project completion reports. So you'll see column A is the total amount we've requested, and then column B is the total amount requested after that 10% retention is taken out. And then column C is where we get into the total amounts that have been paid. And you'll see that we've received payment for the full amounts requested after retention through invoice 7A. And then we get into invoices 8A and 9A where we've received a partial payment. And again, as I referenced on the previous slide, we're anticipating that we'll receive the full payment for those amounts, for those removed costs for invoices 8A and 9A. And again, we haven't received any payment yet on invoices 10, 11, or 12A. And then moving on to the last column is that 10% amount retained as part of our funding agreement. So in total, as it stands right now, and you'll see in that green box at the bottom, the total amount that we have due from DWR, which includes the amount that they have not paid us, but we have submitted, as well as the amount retained, is about $455,000. And in the orange box right below that, we'll see that we're rewarded a total of about $2,146,000 as part of our Prop 1 funding agreement, and we have about $393,000 left over to request through the end of our grant term period. Now, most of that $393,000 consists of work under the SDAC program, which is still ongoing. We actually have two SDAC programs, one being the rebate program, which has terminated as of several months ago, but the water audit, leak detection, repair, and conservation program, that work is still ongoing, and that constitutes most of that $393,000. So before I move on to the next slide, I just want to mention that this is a draft table right now. I am continuing to work with April to confirm that the amounts that DWR has paid us are correct. So we hope to finalize that shortly and really get a confirmed sense for what has been paid so far. So if there aren't any questions, I'll move on to item 5AII, which is the Prop 68 status update. And we have a similar situation to Prop 1. We haven't received any word from DWR on invoices 10B or 11B. Those are still in DWR's hands. We submitted invoice 12B on November 30th for the amount of $3,158.82. And we're anticipating that it will take some time before DWR gets to that as well. Now, we did, if you'll recall, we are working on a grant amendment to our funding agreement with DWR for several things, including an additional $30,000 that the authority was awarded at the time that we were negotiating the Prop 68 portion of our agreement, but was not made available to award at the time that our agreement was executed. So we are working on this amendment with DWR. We submitted a draft set of documents to include in the amended agreement on August 23rd. DWR came back with comments on those documents on October 22nd. We were able to revise those documents as we were directed by DWR and get those revised documents in their hands on November 30th. So again, those documents are in DWR's hands, and we're hoping that they'll be okay with our revisions so that we can go ahead and execute this amendment and secure the additional $30,000 for the Groundwater Authority. So moving on to the next slide, we have, again, a grant payment summary table for the Prop 68 portion of our funding agreement. And if you'll recall, most of the work under our Prop 68 grant is meant to be paid in arrears, which means that most of the work that occurred under this grant was actually completed, or for the most part was completed, before we actually executed the funding agreement. And the purpose of this grant was to reimburse the authority in arrears for some of that work, which involved things like the allocation process during the GSP development and engineering support for the pumping fees, the extraction fees that the authority has adopted. So you'll see a similar layout on this table as the one for Prop 1. We have the total amount requested before and after retention, the total amount paid so far, and the amounts receivable and the amount retained, which is, again, 10% of the total amount requested. And so you'll see that because the purpose of this portion of the grant was to pay for cost for work that was already done, you'll see that a majority of the awarded amount in grant funds was requested as part of Invoice 7B. We were awarded at the time $300,000 under Prop 68, and approximately $270,000 of that was requested as part of the first invoice. So you'll see most of the invoices after 7B are similar in amount, and they include ongoing engineering support, again, for the allocation process for GSP development and for engineering support for the pumping fees and other compliance tracking. And I will also mention that on the bottom in that orange box, the total amount awarded, $330,000, that includes the $30,000 that was recently made available by DWR. So we were originally awarded $300,000, which was made available to us. $330,000 is the total that includes that additional $30,000. And one last thing, this Prop 68 portion of our grant, most of that work, again, has wrapped up. We're anticipating, and actually as part of our grant agreement, that the work done under this part of the grant will be done by April of next year. So we've got a few months to invoice the remaining amount to reach that $330,000. So with that being said, I'll move on to item 5BI, which is the Recycled Water Program update. And before I move into the actual slide, I just want to mention that we are releasing portions of our alternatives analysis in various sections. As Steve mentioned before, we have completed and released Section 1, I believe, a month or 2 months ago. And we received comments from the TAC and the technical team on that section. We're not planning to re-release, for example, that Section 1 after we incorporate all of the comments and feedback that we receive. We're hoping that, as we release these sections and get feedback, that we'll be revising those sections appropriately and then compiling all of the revised sections into one tech memo. So, again, we're working on incorporating all of the comments that we've received so far, but we won't be releasing revised sections, so to speak, until we get towards pulling together the entire analysis tech memo. So starting with Section 2, this is a characterization of the effluent quantity and quality that will be coming out of the city's new wastewater treatment facility, quality in terms of things like total dissolved solids and nitrates, total organic carbon. This section we released to the TAC and the technical team on November 19th, and we did ask for comments on that section to be submitted to us before the end of this week. I believe we did receive some comments already on this section, but again, we'll be looking for those comments by the end of this week. Section 3, the identification of recycled water alternatives. The intent of this section was to document the alternatives that we're considering, such as landscape irrigation and groundwater replenishment. And in addition to that, documenting just a brief summary of some of the assumptions that we made for the recycled water project while we were developing the GSP. And given that we are now almost 2 years now from the date that we adopted the GSP, how those assumptions have changed in terms of what the priorities are as far as projects and how they'll actually contribute towards sustainably managing the Indian Wells Valley Basin. So we're hoping that this section will include all of that documentation as well as just a list of what the alternatives actually are. And with that, it will include, at least at a preliminary level, a ranking of each alternative at this time in terms of, again, priority to sustainably manage the basin, as well as the available information for all the alternatives that we have at this time. So we're hoping to release that section out sometime early next week. It's undergoing staff review at this time, but again, we're hoping to release that within the next few days. And I just also wanted to note, while we're mentioning this preliminary ranking, that as part of our scope of work for this analysis, we are intending to do an initial screening of all of the alternatives based on evaluation criteria that we'll be establishing with the city and the water district as part of the technical team that we've established. So that initial screening, we're hoping that will take place after we release the next two sections, 4 and 5. Section 4 being a summary of the regulatory and permitting requirements for the alternatives, and Section 5 being an outline of the evaluation criteria for the screening. So moving on to Section 4, again, this is a summary of the regulatory, permitting, environmental, and legal constraints for all of the alternatives. We're hoping to, we're working on that section right now, and we're hoping to release a draft of that to the TAC and the technical team by the next board meeting in January. And next steps, again, we're continuing to work on Sections 3 and 4. And we haven't quite gone to this yet, but we are still hoping to schedule a meeting with the technical team, which includes the city and the water district, just to review the sections that have been released so far and discuss where we're going as far as establishing evaluation criteria and getting into the real heart of the document, which is the evaluation of the alternatives and the screening. So that'll wrap up my report, Steve, unless you have any questions.
I don't. Very nice, Joseph. Thank you very much. Where's going to mention something?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm glad you did mention the initial screening, and much of that for the audience and the board, much of that is reaction to the situation that we encountered a few months back with Cyril's, with Cyril originally being one of the higher, at least preliminary higher ranking alternatives, but the things that we've learned that maybe they're not. Maybe it's not going to rank so high anymore, but the preliminary ranking will just give our technical team, the TAC, and the board, give everybody an idea of where we think we're headed, so we can have some initial info. Because I think we want to try to make sure everybody's on the same page as we move forward. So I think that's it. I will move on to the next PowerPoint, and I'll do this one. And it's really just an update. I did a little bit of it at the start of the Water Resource Manager report. This is one PowerPoint covering 3 different topics. The first one being the surface percolation replenishment report. Steve Reich, who is our hydrogeologist, has worked on that. He did release the draft phase 1 report to the TAC for review. And I want to remind folks just very generally that the part of the reason for doing this review of surface percolation potential in the Indian Wells Valley Basin is to evaluate it to a point of either identifying viable projects to go forward and look at, actually investigate and do some additional work in the field on. We know there's been work done out there already that have not yielded really good positive results about surface replenishment. Or, on the alternative, would be to document what we've learned, what we know, and make a determination along with the TAC, who our job is to take input, technical input from the TAC, to document what we know about surface replenishment. So we have it as part of the Groundwater Authority and as part of the implementation of the GSP, and then maybe put it to bed and look at other alternatives. So that's where we're at right now. Phase 1 report provides mostly information on previous work. We've gotten some really good comments from at least one TAC member. We haven't gotten comments from a couple of the other TAC members. As you know, we only have a couple of TAC members active right now. But the comments we did receive, we are considering very seriously and very carefully about our next steps. We're trying to, it's not set yet. I'll just, to be honest, well, not set yet, but my plan is we're trying to have an internal discussion on those comments tomorrow and make some decisions on what direction we go forward. So with those comments, because they're very, very good comments on trying to focus our efforts here on something productive and we have no interest in studying anything for the purpose of just studying it. So that's where we're at there. We should have some information for you on that certainly by the next meeting, and certainly back to the TAC. We'll report back to the TAC on what we think about the comments that we received. Okay, the other two items are really together. That is the shallow well impact mitigation program and the policy on temporary water use. Both of them really are policy programs. I reported earlier that these have been reviewed a couple of times by staff internally, and certainly have been presented to the board in two different formats. The last one as a policy. We believe that they are close to being ready for board approval. They may be able to come back to the board in the January meeting for actual approval. Not sure yet. They are at the PAC. And the PAC had a meeting in November, did not have one in the December. The meeting they would have earlier did not have that meeting because of coordination issues. We'll hear from David Janis, I think, later in the meeting. But my request, and I'll do it then too, but our request, the staff request is that the PAC reviewing these two documents to please provide, hopefully constructive recommendations to the policy that they have, so that we can move forward with the board approval, and then potentially maybe applications for shallow well impact review and or temporary use waivers of assessment. So that's the report that I have for those projects. I'm going to move right on into, as I mentioned, Heather's report, and I don't think she's on. If she is, she could jump on and interrupt me or correct me. What Heather did from the last meeting, we had some comments from Director Matora, and what she tried to do is go back and address those a little bit and rework this PowerPoint on our schedule. We haven't changed our schedule as far as preparing the annual report, but this is a little bit of a very slight, but a little bit of a revision to the schedule for distribution and review of the annual report this year. So it's the 2022 annual report. We're preparing it right now. The intention is to have it done in about a month. Jean, Heather, and Nicole are all working on it right now. We intend to have it done in early part of January. We did, as I mentioned, we did receive comments at the last meeting. And they're being incorporated into the annual report. We also received comments on the content of the annual report. We didn't receive many when we released it last year, but we're receiving them now in anticipation of incorporating the comments, concerns, suggestions into this annual report. So we are addressing those. Again, Director Matora did provide several comments. Some comments related to how to interpret the lack of data in certain areas. Some comments related to how we evaluate data when we don't have data in certain areas, how we, without running the model, how we use different engineering methods to evaluate data when we don't have complete data. So we're looking at those comments, and I'll mention to Director Matora. Internally, some of the things that you were working on evaluating the ways that we sort of interpolate data are also being done by Jean and Jean Moran and her staff. So that's where we're at. We're working on the report. The schedule, revised a bit, is we're looking at tax staff review combined together. Middle of January, it'll be out. We expect almost a month. Hopefully we'll have a full month review for comments. Then from February to first part of March would be revisions, prepare the revised draft, the annual report, comments evaluated and incorporated. The board meeting in March is the presentation to the board. No action is required there. It's really just a receive, accept it, so that we run it through the boards of the accept report so that we can submit it to DWR on time. It's due by April 1st. So depending on whether we get any additional comments, we want to leave time in case we do get some comments or other comments during the board meeting when we present them to the board. From the 10th to the 1st, we've allowed a little bit of time to finalize the annual report and then present it to DWR by the required date. So I think that's the end of the Water Resources Manager report. And Chairman Hammond, we'd be happy to answer any questions. Joseph's still on the line too.
Thank you very much. So we'll bring it back to the board for any questions or comments from the board.
Yes, I do have on two of the view graphs comments or questions. Back on the recycled water program update, last water district meeting I attended, I was told that we were waiting for a final version of the plan. As you well know, or everybody here I think knows, is that the water district is working with the GA and with Stetson to try to do a collaborative work on the wastewater recycled water program. In any event, what I've been told is that the water district is still waiting to get a copy of the final version of the plan. And what I think was mentioned was the schedule, the budget, and a division of work or labor as how we would divide it between Stetson and the water district. So I would encourage you to contact the water district to make sure that there's communications is actually going on and that we're really working together on that. I think that's vital. The recycled water is critical to the water district, and we want to make sure that we're involved from the beginning to the end. So it doesn't really require a response. On the last view graph, the annual report, I noted in the last annual report, the 2020, we had a problem with a data gap being generated because of the COVID pandemic. May I ask, have we resolved that problem, and are we now getting the data that we need to do the report properly?
Director Ventura, I believe it has been resolved. I believe we did get the data this year. Just as a clarification, I'm not directly working on it. Heather is working on it with Gene and Nicole. Nicole Wilson out of our Carlsbad office too. So we'll take your question and I'll verify it and get back to make sure one way or the other, because I don't know for sure, but I believe it was resolved.
Okay. Well, it did seem like that, not getting data points from half a dozen wells or maybe a couple more created quite a problem in terms of the, I guess, the legitimacy of the results that can be drawn. So I've got a big interest in verifying that we really do have the right data on the right wells this year.
Agreed.
Also, I want to thank you for pushing up the review for the TAC. I think you'll find that most of your good comments are going to come from the TAC, and so that's greatly appreciated. I want to thank you for that. I do want to question, though, the issue of the PAC as well as the public. In my mind, there are some areas of the report that I think are relevant to the PAC, and we don't want to exclude the PAC. And so I'd like to see the PAC given the report as quickly as possible. And I think it ought to be up to the PAC to decide what elements of the report a policy issue rather than a technical issue. And on a similar note, the public needs to see the report. They don't need to see it at the same time the TAC does. But let's face it, some of that report is highly technical. You can't go through it in 3 days. And quite frankly, the board packet the last 2 months has not come out 3 days ahead of time. I got 1 day to review the entire budget. I want to make sure that the public gets the report in a timely manner, even if it has to go out independent and separate from the board packet. And then there was one item on the lower part of that view graph that said that no board action is required. Could you clarify what that means?
Only that the annual report is not required by Sigma to be approved by the board, because it is just a data report. It's an annual report of the data collected and a review. So the process is to bring it to the board. The board would accept it. The annual report is accepted. You've had a chance to review it, and you're comfortable with staff, which is us and the water resource manager, staff submitting it to DWR. So it's not an approval, it's just an acceptance.
And I'm okay with not a formal vote approval. When I want to make sure that we don't have an instance of what's happened in the last 2 years of the board seeing it after it was sent out. So I want to make sure we understand that it really is the board's report as far as I'm concerned. The board owns it and is responsible for it, and the questions that come back. Therefore, the board, not the staff, we are responsible, and the board needs to claim ownership of that document. Yeah. And that's all I have. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to public comment from the floor on item number 5.
Joshua Nugent from Mojave Pistachios, and I had just a general comment on the wastewater recycling and the funding related to that. So it looks like the funding is the $22,000 this month is tied to the replenishment fee. And if you read the Proposition 218 engineering report, section 5.3.2, wastewater recycling, says the authority does not have any regulatory control over wastewater treatment facilities in the basin. As a result, the authority cannot and does not include any cost analysis for recycled water projects in this report. I believe I brought this up in the past. It was commented on that regulatory control has changed, and now that the GA can for whatever reason. But again, it says that this report does not include any cost analysis for recycled water projects in this report. So this will be a recurring theme today, is that we need to make sure that on all of our various funding sources, we are following the engineering reports and the resolutions that we have set those up. And the answer to all this is going to be that we need to do a 218 to fund the GA in the long run and not continue to rely on these existing sources and trying to peg incorrect revenue sources with incorrect expenses. So I just, while we're on the same topic, I want to further point out that there's a section 6.3 in this Prop 218 that talks about impositions and exclusions, that says that people that are excluded are those that have permission to extract unused portions of the Navy's estimated Federal Reserve water right, or carryover extractions. And so that's the full 7650 according to the 218 report. And I just want to get this in the record here from the July of 20 statement from Commander Peter Benson that says, the Navy agreed to an allocation of 2,041 acre-feet through the GSP process to support on-base activity to include anticipated growth. The Navy did not provide a Federal Reserve water right number that will be decided through an adjudication after extensive discovery and cross-examination. The IWVGA alone made the decision to use the Navy's pumping data to estimate a Federal Reserve water right. Additionally, the VWA IWVGA, made the allocation decisions to transfer the estimated Federal Reserve water right. The Navy did not direct and did not imply or ask that the GA should transfer the estimated Federal Reserve water right balance. So again, this is just going to be a recurring theme today, is that we're being a little fast and loose with some of our funding sources and some of the legalities behind them. Thank you.
May I comment on that?
Yes.
A couple quick comments. One is the GA is being very careful about the purposes to which it's putting the various restricted funds that it's receiving from the two sources. So understand that in each instance that's been the subject of careful legal consideration. So I disagree that we're doing this willy-nilly. Regarding the amount of the Federal Reserve right, obviously it's a great source of frustration to the GA that we did not get a projection from the Navy regarding their Federal Reserve right absent an adjudication, which will be long and expensive. But we have an independent responsibility to make that determination, and clearly that's what we did.
Wes Katzenstein, PAC member. Had a couple of brief comments on the shallow well mitigation plan. I did submit written comments in November as requested. I'm assuming that those were received.
Yes, Wes, they were.
And a couple of key points I want to make, thank you, Steve, is that undesirable results are going to be key to how things proceed. And the shallow well mitigation is to mitigate one of the primary undesirable results that we've defined here in the basin. And the language in that document should reflect that up front. And two other brief comments. I made comments earlier when this document came around that the urgency of the situation is not captured in how we're moving forward. If a shallow well fails, it's a problem here and now for that well owner. He may be getting water through a garden hose from his neighbor. He may be hauling water, and he needs to get it fixed right now. And from that point of view, I think the GA needs to offer support to that well owner. First of all, there needs to be quick and urgent information made available to that well owner, exactly what process he should follow so he can be reimbursed. And in fact, perhaps the GA should also provide an individual or perhaps a contract person that you have under retainer to help assess that well right now, so that as the well owner moves forward in the urgent repair, that well owner is doing what is appropriate so he can be reimbursed. And I'll use the word reimbursement. That's something Judy Decker brought up recently. It is a reimbursement program, and that fact, I think, was captured in the most recent version of the document. But there's another equally important point that needs to be made in the urgency, from the urgency point of view, and that is, if my well goes out, and it turns out my neighbor's wells, or wells in the vicinity, are going to go out soon for some more global reason. Perhaps the water level has dropped far enough that we're going to have multiple well failures, or perhaps the water quality has failed to the point that we're going to have multiple well failures. I think it's been discussed that the GA then needs to solve the more global problem and provide a source of water to those folks in that geographic vicinity to remediate the undesirable results. And so if I go marching off and repair my well, hoping to be reimbursed, and then we find out later that we should have been taking a more global point of view and addressing a larger well failure area, that's a screw-up. And I think the way we overcome that is, to, once again, to get the GA involved at the start of each well failure and take a look at if it's a single well or a larger area right up front. So another reason to have perhaps someone on retainer, perhaps or perhaps an expert as part of staff, and be sure that we're involved right at the start. Thank you for the 3 minutes. Perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Wes. And so if I have a quick comment. So in regards to what you had just stated there, on a global perspective, would require acquiring data information from several wells or like a regional or sectional area to be able to, preempt a catastrophic failure, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, That would seem to be implied by my comments.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is a measurement program to measure well levels, as you know, across the basin, and hopefully that might also help in assessing the situation. But I can see where you're headed. It bumps head on with the problem of private well owners tend to be private people, and they're not as forthcoming as they might be. But that doesn't preclude the need to address this problem by the GA. But you're right, it would involve presumably looking at vicinity wells, perhaps, if that's what the yearly water measurements would imply. So, correct.
Thank you.
I believe that the state is on record of saying that they would like to consolidate wells where that makes sense. So that's in relation, I think, at least similar to what our speaker was saying. I think that's something else that we want to make sure that we look at. That is, if there is consolidation that will help half a dozen wells to prevent doing 6 individual wells, that would be something that we really need to look at. And I think it was in the original version. I'm not sure if it was in the pared down version. And if it isn't, I think it needs to be included.
Chairman Heyman, if I might, those are very good comments, especially Wes's on looking at the regional. We do include if we do have a well failure or an application to review shallow well impacts analysis, we do definitely include not only that well, but regionally as part of that, because we would actually absolutely want to be looking at the bigger picture. We certainly don't want to do it one at a time. So that process would be included in the staff's evaluation.
Good. Thank you.
Judy Decker. First of all, Steve, I want to say that my comments during public comment were mostly addressed to the board, who do not discuss your projects you present very often. Then I have another comment. It has to do with what Wes Katzenstein just said. I am concerned about the GA, the people who are on the PAC. People on the TAC are totally technically oriented. I'm concerned about, how should I say this, an overlapping of government authority. What Wes brought up, I happen to know where Wes lives, and what he brought up about multiple well failures in a fairly short period of time is quite possible where he lives, because there are a lot of 2.5-acre parcels with individual wells or a 4-way split. One needs to perhaps think about having in that well mitigation plan the issue of approaching governing agencies that are in the water purveying business, because there's a real possibility of the GA overstepping its bounds. I'm not saying intentionally, but in just doing so, whereas a governing agency like the Water District, if they were approached, could create an assessment area and hook those people up to the Water District. And this is theoretically possible that the same thing could occur with the Inyokern CSD, who is the other large public water purveyor in this basin. And I have that concern. It's been brought up a bit in our PAC meeting. And I think in order to cooperate and move ahead, you people that sit on this board, not you as individuals, but you as representing the city, the Kern County, and the Water District, are going to have to work very hard and diligently at cooperation with one another. I leave you out, but I don't mean to leave you out intentionally. You just don't get in this one. I think you need to think about that a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Wes Kassenstein. One additional brief comment to Steve Johnson's most recent comment. I think that I like that you're looking at the more global picture. I guess one of my key points was that needs to urgently happen right up front and not be a process that plods along for 6 months, which I recognize the review of the actual expenditures and a reimbursement program will take time and review like you've outlined. But there is an urgent need right up front if there's a well failure to look and see if there's a more global problem so that the well owner doesn't go marching off in a direction that isn't really going to work out over time. So I guess the key word there would be the urgency. Thank you.
Any other public comment from the floor? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. We do have a caller. Caller, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This is Mike Sonat. I haven't given this as much thought as I would like to, and so I'm totally unprepared. I heard that there's 800 wells and only 124 well owners have registered. And there's a debate on the carrot and stick approach. I would suggest perhaps viewing an incentive program. If you buy real estate, you buy risk, and the risk is you have a well and it goes bad. I would offer a well registration program that incentivizes owners in the form of an insurance policy, and you could probably do that, and people would willingly sign up, have their wells monitored, and know that if something goes wrong, there's somebody to call in everybody's agreement, even the neighbors in this program. So I would view it as an insurance incentive program and see if you can't get more participation. And that would include well owners chipping in on some of the replenishment fee, and perhaps vacant landowners want to protect their real estate values in the same way by making sure that their land has water under it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next caller. Caller, go ahead. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, this is Renee Westelusk. I want to say that I agree with Wes Kastenstein's comments because I'm truly worried that there's not a procedure in that shallow well mitigation plan for true emergencies. I'm worried about well owners suddenly stuck with no water. There needs to be some kind of procedure of what to do immediately other than call a well driller, because maybe that won't solve their problem. And what if they're financially inadequately funded to mitigate the situation on their own? I think the GA needs to provide some kind of emergency procedure, and not the person doesn't have to wait 90 days to get some kind of review by the groundwater authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Next caller. Okay.
Chairman, if I may, this is Phil Hall. I think we've addressed this before to an extent, and I don't know, maybe when I addressed it before, I wasn't as clear enough on this emergency that I think we should get out there. The problem with an emergency on a well isn't just that the well has a problem. The home itself at that point has a problem. it has no way to pressurize its plumbing system. So this is really a plumbing problem at that point. If the well just immediately just goes bad overnight. Hauling water out there is not going to pressurize it. None of that will pressurize it. We need to have a period in time to take to ensure that those that are paying for these mitigation aren't paying for a well that should not be mitigated because it has some other problem. And that's something that this board has to do because it's taking care of public funds. This isn't just a no-fault insurance policy that's out there. We have to inspect that. But whenever somebody's saying the emergency and the emergency situation, we don't disagree that it's an emergency and that people need water at their homes. The problem is, what can you do about it? And for most of those systems, you're not going to be able to pressurize, even if you put out there a temporary tank and hauled water to the temporary tank that can pressurize the home. That's the nature of the beast we're dealing with here. If in the future somebody comes in and they have a system where they can pressurize their home, when they come to the board, quickly I would believe, because their well had just failed, then we can address that at that point. But to put something down in a policy to deal with emergencies is really difficult at this stage because we don't know about the plumbing problem. The other thing I will point out is we kind of know when these wells are going to go bad in most instances, and Steve can back me up on this. In most instances, what you're going to have is you're going to have a situation where the screens of the well are now above the water line. And once that happens, those screens will rust out very quickly and the well will fail. That doesn't happen overnight. So if you're a homeowner and you now know that the basin has drawn down to the point that your screens are exposed, you should be coming to us at that stage. Your well will still be operating, but we know your screens are exposed. We know what that means, and we can start working on it at that stage. So it's not as though a lot of these, we're not going to have a lot of emergency, immediate, overnight situations. It's going to be an action that takes time. Monitor your well levels, know where your screens are, know if that's going to be an issue, and we won't have a lot of emergencies for those because we will be working towards solving that problem before their well actually collapses from the rust of the screens. So those are the two main points I want to get out there. Yes, there will be some, and we will have to deal with those, but plumbing and the realities of plumbing a home matter here. That's all for now.
Mr. Chairman, if I might comment. It's been 60 years since I've had any experience with a well. But back then, when I was a teenager living on a farm, we had our own well, and it did have its own pump in the system. And so I suspect there are still a few local pumps or wells that have their own pumps. Does anybody in the audience know anything about the ability to pump water? I guess I'd be surprised if we didn't have at least some.
Don Decker.
Chairman, if I may again, the pump from the well is what pressurizes the home. If the pump goes bad because it's not able to supply from the well, you could in some instances have a secondary tank that the well feeds to, and then you use that source to pressurize your home from. But the point being is a lot of systems use the well itself and they pressurize from the well. And if you don't have that pressurization system because the well is gone, you have to figure out a way to sidestep the current plumbing arrangement. That's the real problem I'm pointing to on pressurization. And in some instances, when they come to the board, if that plumbing issue can be dealt with, then I'm sure the board can address that, and we'll do so in a timely manner. But I wanted to get that out there. You do have to think about the plumbing problem. And the other problem is again, if your screens are no longer completely submerged, you should be coming to the board now. Oh, and that brings up another point that Mr. Samat was raising. Back when I was on the dais and advising, there was a point in time where we had talked about well registrations, and it was discussed in the board, and nobody really came to a firm conclusion on it because that board could not determine and make a choice for future boards in 2024 or 2025 when somebody comes in and has not registered their well and would like mitigation. That board in 2024 could override the decision of a board in 2019 or 2020. But at that time, it was suggested strongly that everybody get their wells registered, because if you weren't registered, that board in 2024 may not want to and rightfully could avoid paying for mitigations because you did not register your well. So it has been put out there that you should register your well to make sure you can be a part of the program today. To the extent that this board, or even the board in 2019, could influence the decisions of a board in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Go ahead, Don.
Don Decker. I'm a TAC member, and I represent the domestic well owners. We have been, since actually a time before this board was formed, we put together a local well owners association that, although we don't have regular meetings for a variety of reasons, we do keep in contact with our associates via email, and I can comment about the issues of potentially not being able to have pressurization of a dwelling. Most of the rural folks that we are in contact with actually have a full water system, and the well is pumping water to storage only. And the house pressurization is done with a separate surface system, and that surface system is essentially independent of the well itself. So if there's water in storage, the house is pressurized. It's that simple. Now, the few that have a less complicated system indeed will have exactly the problem that was just discussed, that Mr. Hall brought up. But the majority of the rural well owners here are not operating that way. And you can tell just from a casual examination, well, storage tanks all over. And those are not there just for the firefighting function that the county now demands. It's part of a system that gives the owner a complete functional system through, short-term emergencies and so on. So that's the answer to the question. And yes, your farm experience, Mr. Ritora, is exactly how most people have always operated.
Thank you.
So my question for you, Don, would be, is there signs and symptoms that a well owner can monitor that will show the impacts, show if that well is being impacted by a dropping water table?
Well,
on a pressurized system, meaning, they've got a well, they've got a tank, they've got a pressurization system to pump it to the house.
Well, you have to monitor the water level in your storage tank, and if the well is functioning properly and cycling to maintain water levels between a minimum point that you set and a full point, if it drops below that, there's something that's abnormal that's happened. Maybe you've got too many of your water uses going simultaneously, but it can also mean that the well hasn't turned on when it dropped to the low point. So that, yes, there is absolutely a monitoring function. It's the level in your storage tank.
And so then thank you, sir. My next question would be to Steve Johnson. As far as the shallow well mitigation program, do we have a list, or can we put a list of the signs and symptoms of that a well owner should be looking at, so that they can monitor this, so that it isn't a overnight wake up with a catastrophic problem that we could put on into the shallow well mitigation policy?
Yeah, Chairman Henry, we certainly could. We've looked at all those, and we've certainly gotten comments just like you're getting today from folks like West and Don Decker and Judy and such. So yes, we could.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other public comment on the lines? Seeing none, we will move on to item number 6. Board review and approval of professional services agreement with Regional Government Services. This will be with Carol.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your packet, you have a proposal for renewal of the contract with RGS for the GA's administrative services. And you'll recall that this agreement was initially executed back in February of this year for a 12-month period, and RGS suggested, and you agreed, that we might just move up that renewal to make the agreement term consistent with the calendar year and our current fiscal year. So we're coming back with a proposal that would basically go from January 1 to December 31st of 2022. Now, what you have here is very similar to the services agreement that we've had in place for 2021, with a couple of modifications, at least as proposed. And those modifications are to essentially broaden the scope of work somewhat for a couple of reasons. One is to provide a higher level of financial management and reporting, as we've seen a great need for over the past several months. And then the other would be for the implementation of the new accounting software, which would facilitate that reporting. And we've also discussed that quite a bit over the past few months. Just as a little bit of background, we've seen a lot of need for increased financial reporting and financial management over the past several months. We know that when RGS took over administrative services, that you'd been receiving some terrific in-kind services from the JPA member agencies. But I think we've had some increased responsibility since that time. For one, the GA implemented the replenishment fee. And so that in itself has required another level of financial management and reporting to make sure that we accurately and separately track the accounting of those funds along with our extraction fees and our other funds accounts. We also are preparing for a bond issue, which we believe is going to require a considerable amount of staff support, particularly on the finance side, in the coming year. And we're expecting to see some additional grant funds, hopefully to be received next year, and be working with our other consultants, on management of those funds. And so all of that means basically additional staff support, particularly on the finance and accounting side. And I think what you would expect to see is what you're already seeing in our invoicing over the past month or so. Certainly in the current one, we're just seeing a lot more time devoted by our accounting and finance staff in providing the higher level of financial reporting that you're looking to see. And additionally, we are proposing to put into effect a new accounting software, and that's going to be a fund accounting system, and it will make reporting our financials, I think, a lot easier on one hand, but it'll allow us to provide a suite of reports and just provide more comprehensive financial management, I believe, as you and as the public would like to see. One additional recommendation is from RGS is something that doesn't necessarily have to be done right away, but it's a consideration, and that is that we consider transferring our financial management of the Groundwater Authority funds from Kern County to directly to the Groundwater Authority, and that could be done with RGS staff, but with board oversight, obviously close board oversight. It's a recommendation that we're putting out there basically because it will just facilitate a lot of the work that we're doing. The audit support, for one thing, would be more easily done if we're only working with one staff, one agency in terms of managing records. We'll have faster response to audit requests and be able to put some of the auditor's recommendations into effect. Just basically easier and more efficient access to our accounting needs. Again, that's a recommendation that we're making. It's something that we would have to do with guidance from our attorneys in terms of what changes might need to be made, and it's not something that we're asking you to decide today. It's just something that is proposed in the recommendation and scope of work for next year, and if you decide not to do that, obviously it doesn't affect the work that we would do for you, except that we would continue to not have quite those efficiencies that we would if we were managing the finances ourselves. At any rate, there is a proposed contract and scope of work in your packet for your consideration.
Bring it to the board for any questions or comments to Carol.
No.
Just one question, if that's all right. I'm just wondering, Carol, is a year-long term typical for RGS, or do you typically see longer terms in your contract?
I'm sorry, Director, I didn't quite hear everything you said. Could you repeat that?
Sorry about that. Is a one-year term typical for RGS contracts, or are they typically longer?
I have only joined RGS this year, and it may be that we have one of our managers on the line. Is Sophia?
I'm here.
Okay, so perhaps Sophia could answer that for you.
Thank you, Carol. I would say that a year's contract is actually quite typical of RGS's work with public agencies. We do try to align ourselves with the budget cycle of the agency so that we're not overcommitted. There are some relationships we're contemplating doing longer term arrangements in the next several years that have been very successful and very long term, but I think a year is probably more typical than anything else.
Okay, that's the only question I had.
Okay, we'll bring it to the floor for public comment.
I'm sorry. I can wait till the public?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I would just like to indicate that I am all in favor of synchronizing the contract with our fiscal year. Sounds like a good deal. I'm also totally in favor of the implementation of the new accounting system, as well as a greater level of effort on the finance staff. I would think that all of my bitching and complaining over the last year about the finances would have driven Carol insane. And if it did some good, that's great. We need this. I'm all in favor of it. I don't have an opinion right now regarding the transfer of the financial management from the county. I guess I don't thoroughly understand what it means. I do know that every time we have an audit, we have to go back to the county for this, that, and the other thing. And I'm not sure why that happens that way, why it seems like the county is, either we're confusing something or the county is confusing something. If it takes the transfer to the local authority, then I'm in favor of it if there isn't some legal reason why we shouldn't. However, I do have a major problem. In the second page, it says that the 2022 RGS proposal does not specify a monthly fee or a not-to-exceed annual amount. I'm not willing to accept a blank check for payment of RGS or anybody else, and I cannot, even though I support all the efforts, my feeling is we need to have and show better fiscal responsibility, and I think RGS has probably done this kind of work before and can give us at least a not-to-exceed cost. The administrative cost in this year's budget went from what it was originally at $200 or $225, even though the contract was for $200, to $350. And I don't think we ever got a real good rationale for why it went from $225 to $350. But in any extent, we won't know if we're exceeding our budget if we don't have a budget line item that actually means something. So even though I support all of the scope, all of the work, and I appreciate the advances that we have seen in the reporting in the last month or so, I can't support a blank check for RGS or anybody. It's nothing personal. It's just not good fiscal policy. And if there's one thing this group needs to do is get its fiscal house in order. Thank you.
Understand, and let me just mention that the current year contract contained an estimate of staff hours based on the staff that work on the GA matters. And what we had promised to do and what we have done is revisit that time. We did it at a 3-month period and at a 6-month period to see how we were doing. And what we've reported consistently is that the staff hours, particularly the administrative and now the finance time, is considerably higher than what the initial estimates were. And those estimates, again, were based on estimates from member agency staff who were not doing the same level of work that's being done right now.
Don't get me wrong.
No, I understand, sir.
I absolutely understand that you underbid the original contract, and it's going to cost more to do it right, and no question about it. I have no problem with raising the cost of the administrative work. What I don't want to do is see a blank check. Thank you.
Understand.
I'd like to chime in here a little bit, but because it was understood when we first brought RGS on board that it was an estimation that we would revisit and review the amounts of work and the costs that it would be incurred and adjust that accordingly at a later date. I don't see this as a blank check. I think that's a real broad negative statement to be using, because in the proposal here it states that it will be let me read it verbatim here. It is expected to remain in line with the amounts now billed since September, approximately 50% higher than billings for the first half. Actual billings will reflect actual staff time and will vary from month to month, but may be higher in early 22. So I believe this is just a concurrence of what we anticipated prior. And being on a yearly annual renewal, it's not like it's a blank check for an ever amount of time and that we don't have the ability to address it in the future as we need. So I'm in favor of what's being stated here.
We can just disagree. I think it's fiscally irresponsible.
Oh, fuck you.
Sailor language is not really appreciated in a public forum. So,
but that did not come from anyone in this room.
But it came from someone on the system. So anyway, if you can give me a moment to collect myself, that's a little unusual to have happen when you're coming up to the dais at a public agency's meeting. So I will second that. I think we should have better financial reporting. Let me give you my example. Ordinance 2-20 was amended by Ordinance 5-20, which established that the groundwater extraction fee is to recover an estimated $1.531 million in gap funding between the cost of the GSP preparation and what was received. So under that authority, in 2019, $567,000 was collected, and in 2020 through November, this is from the November 2020 board packet, $740,000 was collected. So that's already $1.2 million. If you then go to today's expense or financial report, it says another $1.167 million has been recovered from the extraction fee. So we're already at $2.2 million that have been recovered from an extraction fee that, based on your own ordinance from last December, was only supposed to recover $1.5 million. Then you look at the budget for next year, there's another $1 million to be recovered from this same fee. So again, I hope that as part of your scope of work, it's to go back and make sure that the funds being collected and the funds being charged and the funds being assessed aren't being done illegally. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Don Decker again. I have a comment that relates to Stan's criticism and his concern. The thing that's missing is a tie between the financial components and an actual program plan that contains, program element by program element. All of the projects, all of the things that are being done have an element description that has the goals for that effort, and it has the expected financial basis for that effort and expenditures. That's what a POAM does. And just a financial plan allows one to actually look at the...
Can you get a little closer to the mic, please?
A financial plan allows one to actually look at the project amounts, add up numbers, and make an auditor's job easy. But it doesn't do what Stan is talking about, and that is, how does this actually relate to our overall effort? What actually are we trying to do with these program elements? Sometimes it may be obvious, but unless it's actually clearly written down, I will submit that no one actually understands truly what's happening. That missing element is the connection between an actual plan, which is tied to the goal, the single goal of achieving sustainability in 2040. But there are all kinds of sub-elements that also have timelines that may terminate before 2040 that have their own financial funding line, their own particular requirements. That's what a real plan does for you. That's what's missing. Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Excuse me, isn't it part of the work effort that we're going to tie the finances to the projects and to the schedule and that type of thing? It's going to be more of a system effort to tie everything together?
Well, I won't go so far as to say that we will be producing a scope and budget for every project that we have.
Oh, yeah.
That would be more along our water resources managers area, and I think what you're going to see is something more along the lines of what we're seeing now in our financial reports, but a larger suite of reporting, and I think it will make it easier for us to be able to track specific budget amounts and tie them to specific projects.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yes.
Yeah, Wes Katzenstein. I'd like to kind of echo what Dr. Decker just said, and At the last PAC meeting, I asked to be provided the name of the software that you folks got. I think it was MIPS, is that right? And I went and poked around a bit, and in fact, April got me the information, I think, during the meeting still. I went and poked around a bit on their website, and I looked up the word Gantt chart. It doesn't even come up on a search. Things like schedules. I did want to make some background comments first, that we are moving mountains here. We're making remarkable progress, and anything I say right now is from the spirit of continuous improvement. So I do not want this to be any cold water on what's happening here. But I think there's a room for growth here, and I guess as Don mentioned, it's not clear to me who really owns the problem of scheduling. Maybe that's, I don't know who should own that, but we should have things like Gantt charts, and we have tasks ongoing right now that are going to be very critical to getting a grant, for example, for infrastructure money. Things that have to happen, and they're coming along. But gee, when do they have to end? And what critical deliverables are from these tasks that need to occur when, so that we can move on and actually be successful and timely in getting the grants, for example. So there is a need for I think POAM has maybe become a naughty word, but something like a Gantt chart and a schedule, and interconnects between some of these major tasks, so we know what deliverables needed when. And as part of this planning, I would expect you would cost out these tasks. So I don't know who owns that, but I think that's a gap yet to be filled. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes.
Chairman Heyman, this is Steve. I just wanted to point out that Heather from our office, in response to a request by the PAC, she did prepare an initial schedule of projects and things going on in the Groundwater Authority. It's at the PAC, and maybe when we get a report from David, he can, at the PAC report later, we can hear where they're at on that. We don't have any direct comments. We have not assigned money to the projects, but there is timing, and there are some projects still missing. But the start of a schedule Gantt chart that has been mentioned has been submitted to the PAC.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I don't want to preempt what Dave may be going to say, but there may be some things, if you hear it multiple times, that's fine. I saw that, Steve, and I think it's a big first step. And those, in my mind, were the sort of the high-level ongoing tasks that are needed. Two thoughts on that. First of all, maybe a brief statement, a paragraph for each of those tasks you have saying what it is could be of value. But secondly, those tasks, those are probably mainly the management tasks to manage those where the rubber meets the road kinds of tasks, like some of the studies you're doing that are not ongoing forever tasks, but tasks that have deadlines and interconnects with other tasks. But I kind of hear you're saying maybe you're headed in that direction, and maybe the next iteration we'll start including some of those tasks with deliverables and how they interconnect.
That would be correct, West, and money. Ultimately, we want to attach money budgets to it.
Judy Decker again. Well, okay, I'll go back to what I said in the very beginning. Who decides what needs to be done to get to where you want to be? You've heard some interesting comments today from Wes Katzenstein, Don Decker. You heard some interesting comments also from Josh Nugent. You have passed some ordinances and some resolutions. Be sure you're following them or change them. But who decides what tasks need to be done? When you first started this, the Groundwater Authority, it was really clear what had to be done because you had to produce a GSP in a given length of times that GSP had to have certain elements in it. You hired Stetson engineers because they were very knowledgeable in what those elements were, what was needed, and everything went pretty much according to the way it was supposed to go. Now you're in a position, your GSP has not yet been approved, or at least if it has, it hasn't been made public. And yet you're spending a lot of money and you're doing tasks, but when do you, as a board, decide what needs to be done?
Thank you, Judy. I don't want to get too sideways here on the item that we're going over, so I'm not quite following. So let's...
It's Judy again. When this first started, then Commander Longbottom insisted, actually, that the board create a poem. Nobody knew what that was, so he did it. He brought it in. It was like a recipe. We have this project. We think it's going to cost this much money, and it needs to be done next week, and here's the elements that need to be a part of it. That's what you need. That way you can track. You can track, I can track. Okay, we're going to do this project. We think we're going to do this project. We think it's going to cost this much money, and we have this schedule for it for certain elements of it. That is what's needed.
Thank you, Judy. Any other public comment from the floor? We'll move to the phone lines. Any public comment online? Okay, seeing none. We will bring it back to the board for a motion.
I'll make a motion on staff's recommendation.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Chairman Heyman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rotora,
No.
Director Itnire,
Aye.
Director Peters,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to item number 7, board review and approval of amendment number 4 to agreement with Capital Corps Group. This will be presented by Capital Corps, and I believe Jeff Simonetti, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon. And Mike McKinney.
I think we just lost you, though. Could you go ahead and repeat? Jeff, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you.
Mr. Chairman, I am online. This is Michael McKinney with Capital Corps, and while we have lost Jeff for a moment here, I can provide a quick update regarding our monthly update, as well as go into our 2021 end-of-year report and our 2022 proposed scope of work. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Lots to report over the course of the November time. As you were aware, the federal infrastructure bill has passed. I will talk a little bit more about that in our annual report. It is a $1.2 trillion infrastructure project, of which approximately $550 billion of it has been authorized and appropriated immediately. Approximately $50 billion of that is for water projects, and we're in the process of unpacking those, what went to EPA, what went to Bureau of Reclamation, and what went to USDA. We, of course, remain in negotiations for imported water supplies, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as part of our annual report. In your memorandum, it does talk about the National Defense Authorization Act, the Defense Communities Infrastructure Program Amendment, which was needed for the city's wastewater treatment facility to be eligible for DCIP funding. That has failed and will turn around and roll over to the fiscal 2023 NDAA. In terms of what is going on the state side of the house, right now we are in the process of transitioning our efforts regarding the SGMA implementation program funding over to Stetson Engineering. We have met with Kelly List, who is the program director for the SGMA IP program, and we are putting in an application for $7.6 million, which is due on January 29th. And I believe Steve and his team are on top of that and are beginning to put that application together at this time. In addition, we have another $6 million funding request into DWR under the water recycling plant. That has been pushed to the third round of funding under the Urban and Multi-Benefit Program. There is no announcement on that, but it gives us a little breathing room in order to put this $7.6 million application in before we go after the $6 million application. To give you some highlights of going into our 2021 after action report, and to give some highlights regarding what has happened over the course of this year, Capital Corps has identified and presented to the board for consideration approximately 20,000 acre feet of long-term and permanent water supplies. We are currently in negotiation on 3,000 to 7,000 acre feet of permanent and long-term supplies on behalf of the board. Our 2022 goal, is to complete those negotiations and actually deliver water for you guys in that fiscal year, as well as do all of the ancillary agreements that will come with that. On the federal level, we talked about the 3-year effort regarding the infrastructure bill and where we are at this point in time. We are unpacking that. We're glad to say that we've plussed up some of those funds. We have discussed a number of the projects and positioned both the interconnection project, the water recycling plant, as well as the wastewater treatment facility with the appropriate agencies and with the appropriate policymakers. We believe the infrastructure bill has sufficient funding to provide funding for those projects in the amounts that we are requesting at this time. And that's what our 2022 goal is going to be, is to move forward on that. On the state side of the house, what I just reported is indeed our main accomplishment this year, and that is what started out as what we expected to be austerity measures at the state turned into a $50 billion surplus. We worked with policymakers in the legislature to make sure that there was adequate funding in there for the interconnection project, as well as look for areas where we could plus up budgets for the water recycling plant and the wastewater treatment project. Happy to report that the interconnection project is the $7.6 million that we are going after. The water recycling plant is the $6 million. And then we continue to look for a $5 million shortfall that the wastewater treatment plant has at this time. Any questions regarding current activity or 2021 activity before I go into our proposed scope of work?
I do have one question. I think I'm on the right report, the monthly report. At the bottom of your report, you talk about eligibility of SGMA implementation funding, and you discuss the adjudication.
That is correct.
Could you explain the comment regarding, I believe that the last sentence says, note that if the basin moves forward with an adjudication proceeding and the court acts on the adjudication proceeding, the basin will no longer be eligible for the $7.6 million funding. I guess, and just to explain where I'm coming from, is the feedback that the water district is getting from DWR, from all of our sources, is that the adjudication is not going to impact our ability to get grants in the near future. And so it seems like we're getting different information. If you could explain what you mean by, I think the adjudication proceeding or the above location. Just a second. If it says it
Director
moves
Ritter, I
forward,
know
I guess
what
don't
you're talking
understand
about.
Why we're getting different information.
The information that we have from DWR at this time is that if the authority is the applicant and the successful applicant for the $7.6 million, and the adjudication were to complete during the award period, during the time when the funds would be awarded, and it had some impact on the authority or the authority's status, then funding would stop. It would not be eligible to receive further funding.
Okay, so you're talking about the adjudication going to court and completing before the grant was allocated or
That's
given
correct.
to us? Okay.
Yes, and this is Jeff. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm back. So, Board Member Ritter, I pulled the language directly out of the funding PSP. So right where it says eligible applications for signal implementation funding are, and with the bullet points there at the bottom of the page that you were referencing, at the bottom of page 4, that's the direct language out of the implementation guidelines. And it's the point that we flagged there that says, including those basins within adjudicated after January 1, 2015, or adjudications that have been filed, but the court has not acted on the filing. That's the language that we were flagging there to say that, yes, we understand that there may be an adjudication proceeding, but
let me break in here for a moment, Jeff, and Director Ritter. I think we're steering into a dangerous topic for the district and the GA. Because what this is regarding
I just want to make one final statement so that we're clear on something, and that is that the odds of that the court acting on the adjudication between now and a year from now is somewhere between 0 and -1. So
there could be a settlement or other resolution during that time, but obviously, but. What we're talking about now is a situation where the GA and the district could be directly opposed regarding the outcome of a litigation matter, and this points to a reason for that, and I think we should probably steer off this topic.
Okay. Don't get real concerned about it. Thank you.
Go ahead, guys.
Very good. Any other questions concerning 2021 after action or current month question? If not, I will move into our proposed scope of work for 2022.
No question.
Very good. In 2022, we are proposing 3 major tasks. The first being to secure imported water supplies, the second to be securing federal funding, the third to secure state funding, and then of course we will always continue our administrative responsibilities before the board and the reports that we are required to put forward on this. In 2021, under our first task, our goal here is very simply, and that is to complete those negotiations successfully and to secure the imported water supplies that we have under current negotiation. That, of course, will trigger additional transfer, storage, and other ancillary agreements that may be required. It will trigger some regulatory responsibilities and local agency approvals that may be needed as part of that. And then we are recommending that during the 2022 water year, we continue to look for new supplies just in case and as a backup situation. So those are our 3, our first tasks for the main task of securing water supplies. Under our second task for securing federal funding, as I said before, we are going through the agency unpacking of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And at this particular point, what we want to do is work with those agencies and do scoping meetings very similar to what we did with the state and determine what is eligible and go after those applications. one of our main goals here will be in this year to obtain the $5 million that is needed for the wastewater treatment plant. And then we will look at other legislative authorizations, appropriations as necessary, whatever is needed. And then finally, we want to continue our discussions with the U.S. Navy concerning funding in the interconnection project. That, of course, will take agency advocacy, congressional advocacy. We want to reintroduce that DCIP amendment next year and push it forward and get it moving. And then finally, as I said before, continue our Navy liaison. Under securing state funding, our goal here was to get $15 million in SGMA implementation funds. We've got 7.6 of it, and where we want to go from here is to look at a potential state budget increase, which we're seeing again this year, and see if we can continue to program funds in that direction. Our focus here is going to be to move to the water recycling plant, obviously, and see how much money we can get into there, and then continue to do legislative advocacy and agency advocacy as necessary. May I answer any questions on the 2022 proposed scope of work?
I'm hearing no questions, so continue on.
Very good. We have proposed a budget within the budget that was approved by the board in the last meeting. For Director Ritora, we do have a not to exceed clause. So our not to exceed cost proposal would be $174,375 for the year.
Thank you.
And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. We'll bring it back to the board for any questions anyone have for Capital Corps.
I would just like to thank Capital Corps for some very well-written reports and a very thorough proposal. Clear. Thank you.
Okay, hearing no further questions from the board, we'll bring it to the public forum. So we'll start with the floor for public comment on item number 7.
From Mojave Pistachios, and just like to read a couple of excerpts from the DWR's announcement that was published on December 1st, 2021 regarding the state water project allocation entitlement. And this is just about if Capital Corps were to have acquired us entitlement already, this is an example of what we would have had. So today the DWR announced its initial state water project allocation for 22. So given the unprecedented drought conditions, the initial allocation will focus on the health and safety needs for the 29 water agencies that contract to receive state water supplies. So DWR will focus on prioritizing water supply in 4 categories: water for health and safety needs and delta salinity control, water for endangered species, water to reserve and storage, and additional water supply allocations if the hydrology allows. So that means that they're going to have a 0 allocation for 22. So the lowest initial allocations prior to this were 5% in 2010 and 2014. Last year, the allocation was 10%. However, due to increasing dry conditions, the final allocation was lowered to 5%. So I know when you look at the replenishment fee package, they talk about a 68% reliability in the state water project. So that's why the 5,000 acre feet needed comes out to 8,065 acre feet needed to purchase an actual entitlement. I would hope that in the scope of the 2022 Capital Corps, they do an analysis of the more recent DWR policies, which if you read this whole thing, they talk about reserving more water in Oroville to help protect endangered species and meet senior water right needs. So you guys are going to have junior water rights on the state water project. The other thing is we farm in Belridge over in the other part of Kern County, and we have state water project entitlement. This year it's a 0. Do you know how much we pay for? 100%. So the annual costs, the OM and R, you pay 100% on, and then you get a small portion of that reimbursed in the future based off the power cost savings because the water wasn't actually pumped. But every year you're paying the cost to maintain the canal, which are only going to go up because of subsidence. So again, brackish water, local recycling. There's a lot of other solutions besides going out and getting a bond for $40-something million that only gets you a right to water that's very unsure, that will then require another $100 million bond or other grants to bring the infrastructure to get it in here. So just a couple of the facts that hopefully the Capitol Corps is making you guys aware of. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Any further public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. Do we have any callers? We have no callers, so we will bring it back to the board for a motion.
Chairman Heyman, if I may for a moment, Mr. Phil Hall. The point that Mr. Nugent is making should not go unheeded here. State Water Project does have times, many times in fact, where water is not coming through it, which is why it is critically important that this board considers what its groundwater supply is and protects that for years in the future when it is taking imported water and relying on imported water. When the imported water is not there and it has to rely on its reserves, which is the groundwater in the basin. That's one of the most critical things you have in that area, because you do not have multiple import supplier options, is protecting that groundwater basin for its reserve capacity. I don't know if some people have seen some of the scary things out there where some scientists are now contemplating that we might not have snowpack in future 30, 40 years from now in California at all. That will put that basin in a really dire situation if there's no snowpack to feed import water supplies. So when we have a complete overdraft of that basin, you're running on your reserves, you're stealing from your reserves, and years like today, when you would get no imported water supply, you are taking away your future ability to have water in that basin. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
Chairman Heyman.
Aye.
Vice Chair Rotora.
Aye.
Director Itnire.
Aye.
Director Peters.
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to
Mr. Chairman and the board.
Go ahead.
I said thank you, Mr. Chairman and the board.
You're very welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 8. That will be 2022 board rotation, and this will be presented by Keith Lemieux.
Yes. Good afternoon. This is a continuation, as you know, of an item that was raised at the last meeting, I believe, concerning the rotation of the chair, which is an outstanding item still. As you're aware, the chairman position is set to rotate to the water district effective the first of the year. An issue was raised by the board concerning whether or not it would be appropriate to have that rotation take place in light of certain conflict of interest issues that had been cited by the water district in the past, including the matters involving the adjudication. As a matter of fact, I guess I should comment that we obviously had an example of that in the last agenda item, wherein there was reading between the lines, one could see that there might be an interest, for example, with Director Rotora wearing his water district hat and trying to get the adjudication accomplished as quickly as possible, but then obviously wearing
you heard the wrong thing.
But then,
that was not the issue.
Director Rotora, please don't interrupt him. Let him finish.
But on the other hand, wearing the GSA hat, there is an interest in delaying the outcome of the adjudication in order to ensure funding. So That's just one example, but obviously the water district itself has cited to others. So in any case, where we left it last time, there was a suggestion made by Director Vallejo that we prepare a resolution, and rather than do away with the rotation system or alter it in the bylaws, instead do a simpler approach, which just simply removes Director Rotorua effective January 1st, which would have the effect then of, I suppose, rotating to the next potential chair. And so we've prepared that resolution. There was also some direction to Director Rotorua to come back, and if that resolution is to be avoided, to come back with some alternatives in order to handle, as a practical matter, handle these the conflict of issue problems directly. In other words, how will it work with preparing the agenda and chairing the meeting if there are items that you can't be participating in and can't discuss even. And so the request was made that if we're not going to adopt this resolution, then come back with an alternative as to how to handle those issues, these practical issues. And I can report that there has been no response back on that at present. So currently, the only proposal that we have currently is the resolution before you, which would remove Director Rotorua immediately upon assuming the chairman position on the 1st. And with that, I turn it over to the board.
Any comments or questions from the board?
I would like to give Director Rotorua a chance to comment. I know, as Mr. Lemieux had stated, that that kind of seemed to be the consensus, I think, from the board, as well as several of the public speakers we had, was if Director Rotorua and the Water District could work out a way that there wasn't a conflict or address some of these issues that would be ongoing and then report back to the board, because we didn't have those answers at that time. So I would just defer to Director Rotorua if he has any comment on that.
Director Rotorua,
Oh, yes, I definitely have a comment. First of all, I'd like to let Keith know that the adjudication is going to take more than 6 months or a year. You can bet on it. You totally don't understand what's going on. Okay, now getting back to my prepared statement.
Director Rotorua, could you repeat?
The Water District.
Director Rotorua, just for a second, I didn't quite catch what you had said there on that last statement on the adjudication.
If Keith is concerned about the adjudication being over within a year, he is wasting his concern. It's not going to be. So,
are you saying it's going to be less than a year or longer?
Let me just clarify. I'm not predicting when it will be over. My only point is that the Water District obviously has an interest in resolving it as quickly and expeditiously and economically as possible. That's my only point.
Go ahead.
Let's talk offline, Keith. You've got a lot to learn. Okay, back to my prepared statement. The Water District was advised by the GA of its concerns regarding the Water District assuming the role of chairman for 2022 as stated in the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority bylaws. The GA asked the Water District to consider the issue, and it has. The Water District has reviewed the GA proposed board solution 921 and does not support the resolution or the concept of the Water District should not become the next chairperson. The joint powers agreement and the bylaws were negotiated and agreed by all GA members, which understood there would be conflicts and disagreements between the GA members. Disagreements exist in all organizations, public and private, but business goes on. The Water District acknowledges the potential in future conflicts between the Water District and the GA and or its members created by the various legal actions that have been filed. I note in the staff report that the Water District did not participate in imported water discussions due to a potential conflict. Without going into the merits of the alleged conflict, the Water The Water District is presently participating in imported water discussions with the GA, so conflicts can come and conflicts can go. The rotation of the chairperson position was designed to provide the three most impacted local agencies with equal representation and responsibility for the GA. The common long-term goals of the GA agencies are much more important than the differences. We need to emphasize the common goals rather than the differences. The Water District believes that the bylaws provide the answer to any potential or future conflicts. Specifically, Section 3.1 provides that the vice chairperson shall perform the duties of the chairperson in the absence or disability of the chairperson. The Water District understands and agrees that City Attorney Keith Lemieux will continue to serve as the GA legal counsel for the GA in 2022. We have no argument there. If the city were appointed vice chairperson, the city would assume the chairperson position role on those items in which the Water District could not be conflicted, may be conflicted. The city chaired over these issues in 2021, so the transition would be smooth. The Water District is prepared to assume the role of the chairperson as set forth in the bylaws. We see no justification to deviate from the established protocol. There is a simple solution. There are simple workarounds. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Director Rotorua. We'll bring it back to the board. Any comments from the board?
This is Tim Entnier from San Bernardino County. First off, I just want to thank Director Rotorua for that statement. I know at the last meeting when this came up, the big question I had was, well, how would conflicts be handled in the event that the Water District assumed the chairmanship? And it sounds as though there's already kind of a method to provide for that, where the vice chair would then step up to chair on any issues where a conflict exists. So I appreciate that, and that makes this decision a little easier for me.
Thank you, Director. Are any other comments from other board members?
Yeah, this is John Vallejo, and Tim, I appreciate your insight there in terms of, recognizing there's something available to default back to, but I think that was the concern of the disjointed nature of being able to run our agendas and prepare for the agenda items smoothly with regard to which staff are involved and with, communications between all the different staff involved, as well as, ongoing concerns about costs of running this operation. So anyhow, I would just stand by the concerns I raised initially. I think the fact that the Water District Attorney is voluntarily recusing himself from assuming the rotation says a lot, and I think it has downstream effects regardless of if it's not the attorney, it's just a board member from the Water District trying to head this agency for the next year with all the ongoing disputes and lawsuits and other issues. And primarily, this is, I think, a functional issue, not a policy issue. I know there are, conflicting policy stances from the different agencies, and I'm not saying that that's a reason or the key reason for this issue being in front of us today. I think it goes deeper than that with regard to how does this board function efficiently and coherently. So I still support the direction that we're apparently heading with this resolution.
Thank you, Director Vallejo.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I agree. I think that it's telling that the Water District's legal counsel isn't, and the Water District, as Mr. Director Rotorua just said, and they agree that there's no argument about retaining the current counsel that we have. And so I'm just curious about, why there's, what the disparity is there between the need for retaining the legal counsel we currently have and the role of the chairmanship. And I was frankly discouraged today by seeing the argumentative nature that we had when legal counsel was trying to advise the board on potential conflict, and the interruptions and just the lack of decorum that we had. And as Mr. Lemieux said, there was a perfect example in one of our board items that perfectly highlights the conflicts that we have there. And I'm concerned as well, as Director Vallejo expressed, about the role of setting the agenda. And again, this isn't policy related. This isn't opinion related. This is just, as a matter of practicality. So I would agree with Director Vallejo. I think that it'd be prudent we reconsider this.
Thank you, Director Peters. So I'd just like to add, too, that, we have the past history to look at. We have the overall concern of the board and its functionality. I think it's an issue that the board's being put in a position to make a decision on, that I really think that it should have, been handled by the director from the Water District himself. As stated, the legal side has opted to step down, and I think that in this situation that that it should be an issue that the Water District makes that same decision, and they should be making that decision, not pushing it over onto the the board to have to make it. But here we sit. So I'm in favor of continuing with the direction and the resolution as Director Vallejo and Director Peters has stated too. So I don't think I have anything else to add right at the moment. Any other comments from the board?
Hey, this is Tim again. I really appreciate where everyone's coming from. I think everyone kind of recognizes it's a very challenging situation for everyone, and I certainly acknowledge that it would make the next year more challenging with given some of the conflicts if the Water District assumed the chairmanship than it would be if, say, another board member did. That being said, for myself, the sort of fundamental thing, though, is we're going back now and kind of changing sort of the core fundamental agreements that when this GA was first established. And while that will certainly make this next year easier, I worry about the long-term effects, because now all of a sudden you have there's only five left. All of a sudden now you have one agency that feels like they were deprived of a voice, and and who knows what effect 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line that's going to have. Long after all 5 of us individuals are no longer on the board, the agencies will remember, and I worry about the precedent that it sets. So anyway, that's just my thinking.
Thank you, Director Ittner. Any other comments from the board? Hearing none, we will bring it to the floor for public comment.
So Joshua Nugent again on behalf of Mojave Pistachios. But first I want to make a statement just on behalf of myself. And Joshua Nugent, just a citizen, a taxpayer, person in your district and all that. The decorum today, Stan was not the one who said F you. That was done by a staff member or a legal counsel or someone who was on the staff call. It wasn't from an audience member, and it was not from someone on the dais. So I just want to get that in the record for anyone, court, DWR, otherwise watching this dysfunction who wants to know where that came from. And to that end, I would like to read from the letter that Carla Namath set out on 7/16/2021. It was sent to the United States Navy, Kern County, the City of Ridgecrest, the Water District Authority, the Indian Wells Valley Water District, Meadowbrook, Searles, and Mojave, so all the major players. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from it, and it says, DWR recognizes that Sigma implementation is not without challenges. Management of groundwater in the Indian Wells Valley presents extraordinary challenges due to the basin's very low annual rainfall, decades of substantial overdraft, complex groundwater rights issues, and geographical isolation that limits water transfer opportunities. The GSP and rights to groundwater in the basin are significant matters and are the subject of several pending lawsuits. DWR also recognizes the role of agriculture in the local economy, and that impacts to the industry may have impacts on the broader regional economy. In recognition that local agencies would be faced with such challenges as these, SGMA provides a support role for DWR, and the Newsom administration has provided DWR with the resources to offer technical, planning, and financial assistance to support local agencies with SGMA implementation. DWR is mindful of and committed to local control and implementation of SGMA. However, they want to help whenever possible. The SGMA team continues to review the GSP submitted by the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority through a separate process based on the contents of the GSP and the legal requirements of SGMA and DWR's implementing regulations. In the meantime, however, and to address comments made at the end of last meeting, and in light of the adjudication commenced by the Indian Wells Valley Water District, the DWR encourages the litigating parties and other interested stakeholders to instead focus their efforts on developing a collaborative solution to the issues that are currently being litigated, which may soon lead to additional litigation. DWR has the resources and stands ready to assist with such a collaborative process. Interested parties in the Indian Wells Valley Basin should re-engage with one another to collaboratively develop solutions to the region's groundwater challenges. DWR believes such an effort will focus the time and resources where they are needed most and will avoid the uncertain result that would result from continued litigation. Should you have any further questions or comments, do not hesitate to reach out to Paul Goslin, Deputy Director of SGMA, at 916-873-4921, or Paul Goslin at water.ga.gov. Signed, Carla Namath, Director of the Department of Water Resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Hi, I'm John Gorman, known as Skip Gorman, a resident of Ridgecrest, a shallow well owner, and not a normal participant in these proceedings. I was dismayed to hear the profanity. Everyone heard it. I want to give the person who's as sloppy with his mute button as he is with his mouth an opportunity to right now lean forward and apologize to all of us for that. I'll be quiet.
I don't know where this pertains to this topic, so I'd like to keep the topic online.
I speak in favor of leaving the chairmanship rotation as it has been, with the Water District being next as chairman, Stan Ratora, if that's who they want to represent them. I think we're well served. He's been involved with this body right along, and as chairman, he'll offer the same Socratic questions of specificity and accuracy as he has been, and I support him. I think many support him. It's easy just listening to this body, though, to see who doesn't. My friends, thank you.
I too support the rotation that this first GA board put in their bylaws. I recall being at the meetings where bylaws were discussed. And in fact, we did have a DWR representative assisting us. You all have conflicts. You have conflicts with your own agencies and this agency. For starters, every single one of you supports growth. You continue to approve new building, new water connections in this valley at the expense of the existing people who live here in a valley that is in serious overdraft. There is no reason not to have the Water District as your chairman. One could bring up, if one wanted to, the issue of the wastewater facility and why this group is dealing with that agency, with that issue, when in fact it is a City of Ridgecrest issue. I find that a conflict right there. I think Stan will do a good job. I think you need to have the Water District be represented as chairperson. Thank you. And the comments that some of you have made are very, very disappointing. And your previous representatives would not have said them at all.
Any other public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. Caller, go ahead. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, this is Renee Westelusk, and I'm worried about the functionality of the Groundwater Authority Board if the Water District representative is going to be the chairperson. I think that GA has enough challenges, enough headaches, and I'm worried about the legal consequences of all the conflicts of interest. Are we going to have an attorney on all the phone calls the chairman would make if the Water District is to remain chairman for next year? And I just think it's a telling sign if the own Water District attorney recuses himself from being the rotated legal counsel for next year as well. I just think I need one little point of clarification on the resolution. As I read it, it just removes the Water District representative from chairing the GA. It does not remove the Water District representative from the board. Am I correct? That's my comment. Thank you.
That is absolutely correct. The Water District representative would remain on the board. And just for clarity, it also doesn't prevent the board from reappointing the Water District as chair at any point should the conflicts resolve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Next caller. Okay, seeing no further public comment, we'll bring it back to the board for any final questions or concerns from the board.
This is John Vallejo. I would just note that this process that we are contemplating right now is actually expressly contemplated in the bylaws themselves. So it's not like we're undoing the bylaws that were negotiated. It's actually part of that provision. So in any event, if the chair is ready, I'll make a motion to approve the resolution as recommended by the agenda item.
Thank you, Director Vallejo. We have a motion.
Second.
Chairman Heyman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rotora,
No.
Director Itnire,
No.
Director Peters,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to item number 9, update from Wolf Hansen on the bond progress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, member of the board. I just wanted to provide a little update. As you may remember at the last meeting, I had mentioned that we had gone out on your behalf with a request for proposal for underwriter/placement agents, depending on which method was ultimately used to sell any bonds that may be sold, should you decide to go that route. We received those responses back. We did a thorough review. We had a call with staff as well as legal counsel. Our recommendation was to select Brandis Tallman, which is a division of Oppenheimer and Company. They have direct experience in this matter, having dealt with water rights acquisition for Rosamond. Very similar type of authority district as what you are. There is no formal board action that needs to be taken. This is more informational presentation. I believe our summary was included in your board packet if you wanted to review it. And as was mentioned, the board will revisit this bond issue at least one more time, if not two. The documents ultimately have to come back to you with a financing structure. So this is just keeping the process moving. And whether or not we bring those documents back to you in January or February will be dependent just on how things move the next few weeks. I do believe, at least I think early on, that Nikki Tallman from Brandis Tallman is or was on the line. Nikki, if you'd like to say hello or say anything to the board, I hope you're still there.
Yes, can you hear me? I am here.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have my video on. I don't know if it's showing up, but Mr. Chairman and board, I am pleased to be here. We are pleased to be recommended. We were excited when we saw the RFP for underwriter services come through, and it's an exciting project when we took a look at it. I have been in the municipal finance industry for over 28 years, since 1993. My team and I, we specialize with cities, water districts, and authorities in the state of California. And again, we recently worked with Rosamond on the purchase of water rights for the financing of that purchase. Several years ago, we worked with Del Puerto Water District in Stanislaus County for water rights acquisitions. And this year alone, the team and I have worked on 13 water financings in the state of California. So again, we're pleased to be here, pleased to be recommended, and glad to be able to introduce myself.
And just to add, we've worked with Brandis Tallman on a number of different financings for cities, special agencies. They're an outstanding firm in what they do. So I think they'll do an outstanding job for the authority when and if we get to the point of issuing bonds. I also think probably Rob Pankratz and Ben Levine from my office are on the line, but just wanted to let you know that our team, while I'm here in person, they're always on the line as well. So that's all I had. So just in case there were any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, so we'll bring to the board any questions from the board.
None here.
So I'm good. I just have a question on the future progress.
Yes.
And you'd mentioned that you'll continue this work forward and that you'll report back, on a timely basis. And are we talking about the next GA board meeting to report back, or are you going to report back in between to staff, or?
We will have an ongoing dialogue and meetings and planning sessions with staff and legal counsel throughout this process of putting a bond issue together. Once you decide on the security for the bonds, there are various documents that are drafted that are reviewed by staff and the various legal counsels. Ultimately, when those are in sufficient shape, they are brought to the board for approval prior to moving forward with the financing. So I would anticipate you will, whether you want to or not, you will see me again in January and probably February as well. But it's a little hard to know how things will progress the next few weeks with holiday schedules and everything. But I think our goal is the same as the authority, to try and put something in place as soon as possible that makes economic sense and solves a needed problem for the authority.
Thank you very much. I personally appreciate your work on this endeavor, and I, for one, have been an advocate of bonding out and financing the replenishment fee. Just on preliminary estimates and rough estimations that this could reduce the cost to the citizens and the ratepayers of Ridgecrest down to approximately a 30% estimate of what they're currently paying. So roughly a 2/3 estimate, reduction. And, I'm sure that, the finer details will change as we move further into this, but, for me, that I think is exciting news to the ratepayers of Ridgecrest. So anyway, thank you. And is there any other questions from board members? None?
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We appreciate you coming today, and thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll bring it to the floor for public comment.
So again, Joshua Nugent, Mojave Pistachios, and the way I understand the bond process is we're going to go out and try to get $45 million that will then be paid back over a period of time. And so as one of the people who potentially could be paying that back, I guess one of my questions are, does the current fee structure support repaying a bond? Because the replenishment fee, I believe, is only supposed to collect fees for 5 years. So if we're going to have a 30-year bond and we're only going to collect fees for 5 years, I just am seeing some incongruities between where we're going out and we're trying to get funding. Because again, this funding's not like it's in the name of the water district. This will be, I believe, the Groundwater Authority itself going out, getting a bond, and the repayment for that bond is supposed to be the water district's payments, but those are only supposed to go for a couple more years. They don't go the entire length of time. So I just want to make sure that there's been some, well thought out analysis of the future obligations that this bond's going to set up. Because remember, this bond buys you another bond, because you have to build the infrastructure to get the water here. So again, I actually think there's good places for bonds. I think they're good for a lot of things, but I just think we want to make sure before we sign up for a big future obligation that we have ways to repay it. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Any other public comment from the floor? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. Okay, and no public comment from the phone, so we don't require a motion or any action. So again, thank you for your time today, and we will move on to the next item.
Thank you.
Thank you for your participation today, too. And so we are now going to move on to item number 10, the General Manager's Report, and this will be with Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very short report today, basically just the financial report. You have in your packet the budget to actual report through October, end of October of this year. Pretty self-explanatory, but I'm happy to try to answer questions if you have any.
Okay, any questions from the board?
Yes, I do have a couple. Looking under the augmentation line, I couldn't find Capital Corps. Can you tell me what's the line item that Capital Corps is under?
I believe that would be line 32. Lobbying services?
Is it lobbying?
Yes, sir.
Oh. I guess my feeling is they do a good more than lobbying. But you answered my question. I appreciate it. Also, can you tell me where RGS is located? What line?
Sure, that would be in line 12, administration.
Okay, and only that line?
I believe so.
Okay, so we budgeted 225 and we have spent 110?
Correct.
Okay, and the next year's budget shows 350, is that correct?
I think it's a little less than that. And,
349, I think, yes.
But
Yeah.
that was a placeholder budget. We're just trying to guesstimate because we're not sure what the implementation costs are going to be for the new software. But
Well, till we tell you what we want you to do, it's going to be real hard to, and I guess that's why I would have liked to have seen us agree on a real scope of work. But you answered my questions, and I appreciate it. And I do think your format is better. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, we'll move to the floor for public comment.
Joshua Nugent again, Mojave Pistachios. Just a general financial statement looking at the finances this year and the finances next year. I believe Kern County is going to be repaid $500,000. The city of Ridgecrest in 22 will be repaid roughly $300,000. And the Indian Wells Valley Water District will pay out something like $5 million. So just in light of the last item where they were removed from the chair, I find it interesting that the other agencies are either receiving money back or not paying anything. And the one that was removed from the chair is the one that's providing like 80% of the total funding for the GA next year and 100% of the funding coming from board member agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. I'd like to add that the water district should be included in that list of yours with the county and the city being repaid. Their $500,000 was paid back through them too.
Correct, but I'm talking net money.
Right.
Net money, the water district's out over $4 million. And the other agencies are...
The constituents of Ridgecrest, or the ratepayers are out?
The ratepayers of the water district are out over $4.5 million.
Myself and everyone else that pays a water bill.
Right. My only point is I just find it ironic that the agency that represents how those funds are collected and paid to this agency was removed from the chair rotation. And the agencies that are remained in the chair rotation are not contributing their agency's money. Their agencies are actually getting money back. So that was my only point.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to, just for clarity, point out that the GA remains committed to making sure that the water district is not the only one paying those fees. We still have 2 outstanding actions, and with any luck, Mr. Nugent, your organization will be contributing as well.
Correct. However, I'm not on the board, so I was trying to make comments for those member agencies that are on the board. I realize I'm getting some reactions here. My only statement was I found it interesting as a member of the public that the agency that's funding the most was removed from being the board chairman. So thank you.
I believe he is correct. Thank you, Josh.
Any other public comment from the floor? Any public comment from the phones? Okay, seeing none. We will move on to item number 11, the Pack and Tack report, and this will be with Dave Janis.
Good afternoon, directors. You have in front of you our 3-page PAC report. I'm not going to read it, but I am going to highlight a few key points that I think should merit your attention. Number one, we welcomed our brand new member, Regina Troglin, on board, representing Trona and the folks that are a part of the Searles Water District, or customers, if you will, and therefore stakeholders in the valley. So she's on. They now have a representation. She attended the meeting and fitted in and was welcome right away. Under item number 5, the Communication and Engagement Plan Review, which was the primary purpose for having this meeting, due to an illness and Christmas schedules and, well, holiday schedules overall, the members were not able to finalize their report. They're very close. There were a couple disagreements they were trying to work through, and they asked to extend it to the next meeting, and the committee agreed that as important an issue as it was, we want to get it right. And if you recall from our last meeting, what they are providing in that report, and subsequently the PAC will be providing overall, is primarily minor changes, administrative only, to the C&E plan, because we thought it was a good plan, but specifically we'll be providing key and essential communications topics and all those issues that surround them, for example, important to each stakeholder group in the Valley. And that, I think the board will find those very valuable and so worthwhile delay in the timeline. But one of the things we've done in this process is identify the really key issues that folks in the Valley do not have an understanding of and perhaps need to be reclarified by the board. Okay, number 6. This was the second time we'd had the first draft schedule, which I think Steve and a couple people made reference to. It was the first draft, and it was submitted as very first level, top level, but an idea, a place to start, and specifically gather PAC member inputs about what we expected to put into that schedule. And you've heard many comments here today, and almost all the members reiterated the comments they had made last time. Since we only had 2 days to review it, we asked for an extended period to review, and written comments were provided to Carol Thomas Kiefer, the general manager, on the 10th. But this was a discussion overall, and we reiterated that there really was a concern that the schedule was not linked to finances, as you've heard here. And additionally, there were items brought up with regards to objectives and priorities, that if you have a specific objective, therefore you know where it fits in the priorities and what kind of allocated resources and expenditures should be tracked against it. And you've heard some of that very much today. So there's a summary here of the overall comments. West mentioned, as I pointed out in this report, he asked for the software vendor and also made comments about, and those of us who work in software know the validity of this, who owns the software, and therefore what kind of control do you have. And the contacts, as West listed, are provided in this report, which is available to the public, so they can see the MIP fund accounting software by community brands. And that's not the schedule. That is what will be aid in integrating the financial connection into the schedule, but there still needs to be a clear linkage to what the tasks are, why they contribute to achieving our objective, and therefore what kind of priority and timeline and deadlines they might have, the ones that are not open-ended management tasks, which also need to be covered. So the action from there, recognizing this was a top-level schedule and inputs were provided to the Water Resources Manager and the General Manager in further developing this, that it would take a while, as well as the implementation of the software, as we heard, that's going to take a couple months, few months, that there would be incremental improvements in the schedule linked to these functions. And I took an action for the PAC to work with them in determining opportunity points where we may be able to see incremental products and comment on them to provide additional input. Number 7, I really want to highlight. We spent well over an hour on this issue alone, the draft temporary use policy, and a lot of concerns surfaced, and the discussion fed on itself. I think my memory is 9 of the 11 PAC members had some very pointed comments with regards to this policy and concerns about it. And the first one, the 3 paragraphs, if you only had time, I know you're going to read all of the report, but if you only had time to read part of the report, read number 7, item number 7. It's key. First, should there be any exemptions allowed at all? Because any exempted water, which would be water use above the allocation, without compensation, if not compensated for, if not replenished, or at least allocation reduced across the rest of the residents of the valley, that would lower the basin reserve, and that reserve was mentioned in earlier discussion today, and get to the unintended results, which were cited as one of the primary objective within Sigma, and the whole plan that resulted in those allocations was based on the minimum sustainable level. So anything that we take out of the valley below that is approaching the minimum, the buffer factor for the minimum sustainable level, and perhaps going below. So without replenishment or replacement or outside source, and a recommendation was made from a public comment about, are there perhaps grants or fund sources available, certainly at the state level, or charitable organization, or et cetera, that could cover emergency use, which is a large portion of what's being discussed with regards to the temporary emergency use policy. Are there provisions within the state that could be used to cover for that? For example, forest fires and water use by the county and other agencies that might happen in those. So there needs to be some consideration for not reducing water in the basin, and perhaps there's only 3 or 4 things that can happen if we exclude certain users from paying the fee above the allocation. Either the rest of the valley has to pay it, everybody, or we lower that valley water basin threshold level without compensation. Now, secondly, if PAC members agreed that there perhaps should be some exclusions, this version of the temporary water use policy, you heard Steve say it had come in before much more specifically, and they loosened it up upon discussion, and now we've gotten a look at this and we say it's too loose. Universally, we thought it was too loose. You can drive a truck through it, and what that leads is the potential for people to feel that like there was favoritism when it was granted, or abuse. And so, if we are to identify any uses, temporary use, that are allowed above the allocation, then it's got to be. Lost my train of thought.
Transparent.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's essentially got to be accounted for, and it got to be explained tightly. There should be objective, specific criteria and limits on that. How long a temporary use? How much quantity? What all the considerations around that, so that there's pretty much a black and white policy that the public understands that this is the temporary exemption limits. Normally, recognizing that a policy cannot foresee any eventuality, emergency use especially, when you write it. And so there must be perhaps if any is allowed, there must be a provision to take into account something that wasn't anticipated specifically, and then done transparently and publicly with regards to those things that might be outside the limits or criteria. Thirdly, if any policy exemption is to be granted, it has to be clear all stakeholder groups are affected, everyone in the valley, as we've already talked about. And so they've got to have confidence in what that is, what the impact to them. And so as we develop, not only after we implement this process. But during this portion of the phase, we felt it was very important that the public have the confidence in the process of how we are developing this policy. And as such, we decided that we wanted, in the view of all the somewhat new comments and thoughts that came up during this discussion, that we wanted to look at it again at the next meeting. And I'll skip ahead to the next meeting topic on this. We tried to set it up with the holidays. It's very difficult. Our regular meeting would have been Christmas week, and we couldn't do that. We did look for some other alternatives in a public forum meeting. The only one we came up with turned out to not be, the venue was not available that evening, so we will take this up at our January meeting. We believe it's one of the most important topics we've dealt with because it has ramifications across the whole basin and all users. And since I already noted that we were not able to find an alternative date to meet in December, that concludes my report. Any questions?
Thank you, Dave. Any questions from the board?
I'd just like to say that it's a very thorough report. Obviously, you spent a lot of time putting it together, so I want to thank you.
Any further comments from the board? We'll bring it to the floor for public comment.
The representative for the Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District. I would like to point out one thing David forgot, and that is we have asked the board repeatedly to give us comments on the C&E plan, and to date, to our last meeting, we have had no comments from you, from you. And the other thing, while David talked about it, I'll just put it in a simple sentence if I can. Things like something's free, temporary water use, temporary electricity, whatever you want to talk about, nothing is free. Somebody is going to pay one way or another. And this was the topic that we talked about a lot. It's nice to have a policy, it sounds good, but somebody pays. And in the case of our water supply in this valley, we are pumping the dregs, and we're very concerned about the lack of equality here and the ability of people to get temporary water use. I mean, where do you stop? Is it construction water? The water district, here we go again on stepping over a line perhaps with an existing governing agency. The water district has a very clear temporary water use for things like construction water and things like that. So I think if it's you, the board members, the chairman on the telephone, or if it's Steve Johnson, you need to take a look at what you write and think about those things before you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Any further public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. Do we have any public comment? We have none. Any other public comment from the board? So the current policy is, temporary use policy as it's written is, we're waiting until, or it's, I guess, waiting until after further comment from the board or from the committee. My question is, should we as a board move forward on having the temporary use policy on our next agenda and accept comments from the PAC during this interim.
I would like to ask Mr. Janis's opinion on that, and if what you think time-wise would be best.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no. What you think would be best timeline-wise?
What we can try to do is schedule, and I didn't know you were contemplating putting the policy discussion or the policy decision up at the next meeting, as Steve Johnson had mentioned. The importance of this discussion, and I know Chairman Heyman was at the meeting, and he saw the energy in the room and getting these issues out and discussed and summarized. The purpose of coming back the next time was, having heard all of that from all the members, since the PAC has a representative of every pumping group and user group, all stakeholder groups in the valley, was for us to coalesce our thoughts and put them down maybe in a little more concise fashion, but to surface all the issues and interactions beforehand. And I think that's valuable information that this board should have before they make a decision. What we can do is schedule a special meeting of perhaps in the second week, first week or second week even of January, so we can get an output early. We can't do it before your next meeting in January, because that's the second week, obviously. But we can get, and the first week is still holidays. I doubt if we could get a quorum, and we felt it was really important that we have every member possible at that meeting. So I would say we can hold a meeting early in the month. So in fact, you'd have our report and the public comment that goes along with that meeting available when you took it up for vote on your February meeting. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that would be prudent if the rest of the board would concur if we take this up in January after we receive those comments. February, I'm sorry.
So that'd give us a little more firmed up timetable, comments, and then we'll have it before the board in February for the board's recommendation.
Sounds good.
Any other board members have comment pertaining to that format? Hearing none, I guess it's a consensus. That's what we'll plan on doing. Thank you. Any other comments, Dave? Good? All right. Thank you, sir. And with that, we'll move on to item number 12, closing comments. Any other board members have any closing comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have one comment to address real quickly. So we were in receipt of the DWR Sigma grant project list. We received that from April last week. We just ask or suggest consideration of the inclusion of a conservation study as part of that project list at this time. That's all.
I have two closing comments.
Go ahead, Director Rator.
First comment is I'm deeply disappointed the board took the action it did regarding the leadership position next year. I think that speaks for itself. I really don't understand what the board expects to gain from its actions, and I believe the action is short-sighted. Comment number 2. We need to get the 2020 audit completed soon. We are at the end of 2021 fiscal year. We should have had the audit reviewed and accepted 6 months ago. It's time we actually do it. Thank you.
I have no further comments. Our next meeting will be January 12th, 2022. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe out there.
Dave.